We just have to do this. It's gonna have to look. It's like we always.
Okay, we got a clean picture.
You did?
We did have a clean picture, yeah.
Took a while, but I found it.
Oh, thank you. Marie found one in there.
Does that look good on your screen?
What I did, walk by it.
Yes, that looks fine.
Okay.
Welcome to Goodwood. I'm Guy Prentice. I'm a retired National Park Service archaeologist. Worked for 34 years at the Southeast Archaeological Center. I now serve as the research director for the Panhandle Archaeological Society at Tallahassee, which goes by the acronym PAST. So I'm going to be talking about what we have learned doing archaeology and archaeological research, historical research, and investigations into the way the building has been constructed, and I'll be talking about that today. Basically, we had 2 years of investigations. The first year was in 2021, and then we came back in 2022. So I'll be giving a quick summary of the 2021 investigations, followed up by what we learned in 2022. Next. So this is the Gray Cottage edition, which is no more. This is what sparked our investigations at the Gray Cottage. The plan was to have this addition removed and eventually replaced with a new construction. But there was a question as to exactly when the addition was added. It was commonly believed that it was probably during Fanny Tears's era here at Goodwood that the addition had been added to the Gray Cottage. And so they asked us to do the archaeological investigations to see if we could prove or disprove that. So for those of you who have never been here before, this is a map of the gardens, and that red arrow points to where the Gray Cottage is located behind and north of the main house. Does that work? Well, the little red light's on, so I don't know what to tell you. I'll just speak up louder. Not my equipment. So we came in 2021 and we put in 3 test excavation units and an exploration trench with the hope that we would encounter the builder's trench that would have been dug for the installation of the brick walls for the north addition. So we placed them at the northeast and northwest corners of the north addition. We excavated one inside the north addition, and then we excavated an exploratory trench along the western wall. So these are 2 pictures that show what we found when we opened up test units 1 and 2. And you can see that we found pipes and lots of disturbance that made it impossible for us to learn anything archaeologically at those 2 locations. We then opened up an exploration trench along the west wall, and there we were able to find a remnant of the builder's trench and also a little area that was disturbed from the dripping along the edge of the building. You can see that in the lower left-hand image there, with the black arrows pointing to the drip line that was left behind from water dripping from the eave of the building. And then between that drip line and the wall is the builder's trench. We excavated the builder's trench and we found only one diagnostic artifact that came from all of that excavation, and that's what you see at the bottom of the picture there. It's a piece of pottery but unfortunately doesn't help us date when the builder's trench was excavated. We then went inside the North Addition and we opened up test unit 3. We had to take up the wooden floor in order to access the ground surface to do the excavations. The upper left-hand corner is what we saw once we took the floorboards out. And then after we removed the floor joists, we opened up the excavation that you see in the lower center of this image. And we found multiple zones that included Zone A and Zone C, which were builder's trench fill. And when we excavated the trench along the south wall of the North Addition, we found the builder's trench in profile, which is shown in this image on the right. And unfortunately, although there was a very clear builder's trench there, once again, we didn't find any datable artifacts. We also spent time exploring the rest of the structure, trying to learn more about the way it was constructed so that we can compare it with the North Addition. Crawling around underneath the floor in the North Room, there were two brick structures. One was a cistern in the northeast corner of the North Room, and the other was a brick trough along the west wall. When we started looking at the floor of both of those rooms, we immediately noticed that there was 2 different construction techniques being used in the floors of the South Room and the North Room. And these are part of the original Gray Cottage. In the South Room, we found that the floor had been built with sash sawn boards, and that the joists had been set into the brick on top of a sash sawn ledger board. And on top of the floor joists, sash sawn floorboards had been laid on top. Now, if you don't know what sash sawn means, it means that the saws that were used to cut the boards were straight blades. I put a picture up in the left-hand corner to illustrate what a common sash saw looked like in the early 1800s. And the way the board would be cut was these straight blades would move up and down, and they would push the log through to cut the boards. And that results in straight kerf lines in the board. And I don't know if you can see it very easily, but there are straight kerf lines running perpendicular across these floorboards. So we know that these boards were cut with a sash saw. Now, the North Room, the floor was not original. We knew that because the floor joists were not set in with the bricks when the bricks were being laid. They were inserted by chiseling sockets into the brick walls so that the floor joists could be inserted in. And when they did it, they first plastered the walls, and then they scribed a line across the plaster to give themselves a level line that they could use to make sure that their floor was going to be level when they installed it. And then we also noticed that the floor joists and the floorboards in the North Room floor were not cut with a sash saw. They were cut with a circular saw. And back in the 1800s, this is what a circular saw would have looked like here in the lower right-hand corner. And we know that they're circular sawn because you can see the kerf lines, again, are in arcs, indicating that it was a rotary saw that was being used. The use of saws here in Florida is datable. Up until the 1850s, nobody really had circular saws. So anything that was being sawed with a circular saw had to have been sometime after 1850. So that helps us date when this north floor was inserted. It had to have been after circular saws were introduced into the area in the 1850s. Another interesting thing that we found when we were crawling around on the crawl space of the building is that we found these big iron bands at the southern edge of the north room. And we think that these may be the remnants of the charcoal filtration tank that was built by Mr. Arrowsmith. And in the 1911 edition of the Daily Democrat's The Lands of Leon, they discussed the fact that Mr. Arrowsmith had installed a charcoal filtration system with aerating pumps that coupled with the cistern provided water to the house. So we think that this is probably the remains of the filtration tank. If you compare the Gray Cottage roof in historic photographs, you'll see two things. In 1920, the building had wooden shingles that had been installed during Fanny Tier's ownership of the property. In 2021, when we were getting ready to do our work, it no longer had wooden shingles. It actually had asbestos tile shingles. And we know that those were installed during William B. Hodges' occupation because in 1925, he constructed an aviary that was located near the water tower, and he built it in 1925, and it had the exact same asbestos tile roof. But what's not clear, because there's no photographs of it, is before 1920, the Gray Cottage had a slate roof. And we know that from the archaeological evidence that we found pieces of slate that had been left behind when the slate roof was removed during Fanny Tier's ownership of the property and had it replaced with a wood shingle roof. And interestingly enough, there are 3 other buildings here on the property that also at one time had slate shingle roofs. And that is the 3 original 1840s buildings, including the main house. So as we were taking apart the floor in the north addition to get down to the dirt underneath, we noticed that the flooring had been pulled up and replaced at one time, and the question was when. And we found a clue by the way in which the floor joists had been put back in. We found at the corners that the floor joists were set on a stack of bricks that was set on the base of the wall, and to make the floor joist level, they had used shims that were made from slate and asbestos tile. So they were taking fragments of the original 1800s slate roof, and they were taking pieces of the 1925 asbestos tile roof, and they were using them as shims to replace the joists and make them level. So we know that the floor had to have been put in sometime after the asbestos tile had been installed by William B. Hodges. So the question was, what is the Gray Cottage? And is it the milk house that was reported as being located on the property when George Barber visited in 1880? And most likely it is. It's probably the milk house that Barber identified. And we think that that is the case because remember when I mentioned that the north room originally did not have a floor and the floor was installed later? We think that originally that was the part of the milk house that is described in period literature as being a room from 16 to 18 feet high that is conducive to coolness because it's on the north side of the building, and it's sunken a little bit down into the ground so that it's cooler. And plus we have the cistern and probably a cooling trough in the north room. So I think that the use of the north room as a milk house is fairly certain. And probably the south room, which had a floor when it was originally constructed, was probably used either as servants' quarters or as a place to store the milk products, butter, etc. So in 2022, they were getting ready to demolish the north addition. So we went back to gather additional information that we could glean from the structure by carefully dismantling it. So we began by removing the plaster ceiling to expose the ceiling joists and the rafters and the floorboards. And when we did, we noticed immediately that all of that woodwork up there is sash sawn boards. We were not able to get the north addition to be 3D scanned, which is possible and has been possible for quite a while now, but we couldn't get it arranged. So I took thousands of 1,500, I exaggerate when I say thousands, only 1,500 photographs of various close-ups of the building all over that sometime in the future, someone could take those and use them for photogrammic methods to create a 3D model of the interior of the building. I don't currently have that software capability, but it's there if somebody wants to do it. And of course, being a good archaeologist, we mapped and photographed everything that was there once the floor was removed, all the floor joists, and then carefully mapped it all. So what did we find beneath the north addition after the 1925 wooden floor was taken up? We found more of the builder's trench. And so we excavated it, and unfortunately didn't produce anything again, just bricks and mortar. While we were dismantling the interior of the structure, though, before we got down beneath the flooring, Lonnie found this price tag. And it was interesting that it was from Au Bon Marché, which was a department store in Paris that was founded in 1838. And it had been told to us that this was a store that Fanny Tiers liked to visit when she went to Paris. So we were all excited that maybe we had something from Fanny Tiers's ownership of the property. And I started researching it. I went online and searched to see if I could figure out what this price tag was for. And it turns out it was for a hat that was featured in the winter 1925-1926 catalog of Au Bon Marché. And based on that, we can conclude that no, this was not from Fanny Tiers's era. This is from during the time when the Hodges owned Goodwood, because it postdates the time in which Fanny Tiers was here. So here are some photographs of the demolition of the north addition as it was being taken down. And I was here to photograph it. And during the process, I was also observing everything that I could about the construction techniques that were exhibited around the doors and the windows and elsewhere. And I was able to determine that the west window of the north addition was not original to the structure. And that's because there was a gap between the brick and the header, and there were pieces of mortar that were hanging down where the bricks had been before they were removed to allow for the window to be installed. If this had been original, those bricks would have been in direct contact with the headers of the windows. And then we also found that they had chiseled into the wall here, and so there's all broken bricks. It was not nicely finished ends of bricks. And they also had to do modern brick infill because they had made the opening wider than the window was going to be. We also examined the exterior, and it also showed that the lintel was a fake lintel. It had been made out of Portland cement, formed over wire mesh, and the wire mesh had been attached to the brickwork with finishing nails. Also then took a look at the doorway that allowed passage from the north addition into the north room. And again, the gap that existed above the doorway header had places where the mortar was hanging down, indicating where bricks had previously been removed. And if it had been original to the structure, those bricks would have been laid directly on top of the header, and there would not have been a gap there. So we now know also that the interior doorway that allowed passage between the north room and the north addition was chiseled through the wall. It did not exist. When we looked at the northern exterior doorway, we were able to observe the fact that it was original construction. And so you see the nice ending of the bricks where the door frame was. Also can see that the bricks had been laid directly on top of the header, which is partially removed here, but had been in direct contact with the bricks above. So that north doorway was original to the north addition, and it was the only way in and out of that room. And then when we looked at the east window, which looks into the courtyard, we could see that it was a combination of original and remodeling that resulted in the window that was there just before the building, the addition was demolished. So we had the original header in place with the bricks directly set on top, but then they had widened it to allow for a larger window to be installed. So these bricks had all been chiseled out. And in order to keep this original header from falling out, they inserted a wooden wedge to just add a little bit more strength to where the brick had broken away and didn't leave much strength behind for the header to rest upon. So that east window was original to the addition, but it was enlarged during Fanny Tiers' occupation. During the process of tearing down the northern addition, they also had to remove the chimney that had been added during Fanny Tiers' occupation of Goodwood. And it was very informative when it was removed because it showed this original surface that had been there before the chimney had been applied. And it told us two things. It told us that until Fanny Tiers occupied the property, this building had been unpainted. It had been left looking like natural stone. And it was made to look more like natural stone by having these horizontal and vertical lines inscribed into the stucco to make it look like ashlar stone. If you look at the other three buildings that have these same scribe marks, it's the kitchen, it's the original house, and it's the main house. Again, all buildings that were built in the 1840s. So this shows us that there's every reason to believe, based on these scribe marks, that this was part of the original construction of the north addition, and that it was stuccoed at the same time as the other historic 1840s structures were. And this was confirmed through petrographic analysis. A couple samples of brick and mortar and stucco were sent off for analysis, and I'm not going to go into the details too greatly here, but a letter was sent back that indicated that based on the very light amount of weathering that had occurred to the mortar between the bricks before the stucco was applied was very slight. So it indicated to the architectural historians that the building, once the brickwork was up, could not have been exposed for very long before the stucco was applied. And based on the type of mortar that was used in putting in the bricks, a circa 1845 date seemed to be in order. And I've included these so they'll be available when this is on the website for people to look at the past website. These are some of the photographs that were taken of the petrographic slides that were made. And it shows some of the neat facets that they were able to observe by petrographic analysis of the bricks and the stucco. We tried another way of dating when the north addition was put on by sending some of the roof boards off for dendrochronology dating, which is tree ring dating. You take a piece of wood, you can compare it with a series of tree wood sections, where you can compare the thicknesses of the rings in the wood, and you can come up with a date for when that tree was cut down. And Nicole Zampieri, who's a part-time professor here at Florida State University, and also is a person at up in Georgia. I can't, the name escapes me. Tall Timbers. She's up at Tall Timbers. She was kind enough to allow us to give her some samples to do ring dating, and the results came back on these three boards is that the outermost ring on the top board was 1736, the middle board was 1759, and the outermost date on the bottom one was 1780. Clearly, those are older wood than when the buildings were constructed. Part of the problem might be that the comparative collection that she had to date the boards was located at Lake Louise, which is 60 miles away. And so it'd be better for there to be a closer representative sample for her to compare it with. And she's now in the process of doing that for the Tall Timbers area. And hopefully in the future, she'll be able to reanalyze the dendrochronology and maybe give us better dates. So the Gray Cottage is a story of two kinds of bricks. There's the original construction, which is made with a soft, crumbly, low-fired brick. And then, and that's used again in the guest house, the old kitchen, and the main house. And then we have the remodeled and repaired portions of the Gray Cottage that were built using high-fired brick and Portland cement. And that dates to the 20th century. So it's very easy to distinguish more recent repairs and additions to original. And so that's what you're seeing here. This area outlined in green, that's a repair. You can see the difference between that brick and the original soft brick below it. And while trying to research where those bricks came from with their obvious TPB company stamped into them, I ran across this 1915 Tallahassee Democrat advertisement that showed the Tallahassee Press Brick Company. So obviously that's where they got their bricks. So this is what the total evidence is based on the archaeological and architectural evidence that we have. The north addition was added onto the Gray Cottage soon after the main part of the Gray Cottage was built. And within a few years after that, it was stuccoed in the identical fashion as the main house, the old kitchen, and the guest house with lines scribed in to mimic stone. And the brick used in the guest house is identified in a letter written by Hardy Kroom as having been made by brickmaker Richard A. Shine. And in 1857, Shine, during a court deposition, identifies himself as the builder of the main house, and that he remembered it being completed at roughly 1849. So we have the bricks, we have the stucco, we have the similar decoration, we have this, all four structures having a slate roof. So it's all pretty clear that all four of these structures were all finished at approximately the same time, roughly 1849. So then the question became, what do we know about this Richard A. Shine? Well, I'm sure you are all been following the Tallahassee Democrat and their 2024 issues featuring the 20 history makers who shaped Tallahassee, and Richard A. Shine is one of them. And in the newspaper, it says that Shine was a builder who supervised construction of the Florida State Capitol, and he also built the first Presbyterian church and the Bloxham House and the main house at the Goodwood Museum and Gardens. And it also says the bricks for the construction of these projects were made at a 50-acre brickyard located between Mahan Drive and Miccosukee Road that Shine owned. That is only partially correct. So, Mr. Shine, who was he? He was a mason, he was a builder, he was a businessman, he was a lawyer, he was a captain of the Leon Rifleman Voluntary Militia. He's the Quartermaster General of Florida Militia. He was Leon County's representative in the Florida General Assembly from 1848 to 1855. He was a city councilman. He was a trustee of the Leon Female Academy, which is now Florida State University. He was on the board of directors of both the Pensacola and Great Georgia Railroad Company and the Tallahassee and St. Mark's Plank Road Company. And he was also a member of the Tallahassee Board of Health. This guy was a mover and a shaker. And he's the builder of the main house. And I just want to point out, although it's not very clear in this photograph, notice the square cupola, which is located on the building in 1910. That was removed and replaced when Fanny Tears was here, but that's what it originally looked like. Next slide. So these are some of the buildings that Richard Shine was in charge of overseeing the construction. The old Capitol that was begun in 1839 and then was completed in 1845. The first Presbyterian church, which is shown here in the upper left in 1932. Notice the shape of the cupola that's located on top. It's a nice square structure. When the structure was remodeled, it was replaced with this nice spire. So he built that beginning in 1835 and dedicating in 1838. He was also the builder of the Trinity United Methodist Church. Here's a picture of it as it appeared in the circa 1860 postcard. Here's a picture of what it looked like in 1875. And then here's a picture of what it looked like in 1932 before it was replaced with a newer brick structure. And then these are two historic structures that he was responsible for building, the Bloxham House, the Chittenden House, and although it no longer exists, the 1840 Leon County Jail was built by Shine. Shine was also the builder of the 4th Gadsden County Courthouse, which was built in 1851, and then it was torn down and replaced in 1913. Once again, notice that that rectangular cupola on top. So these are some of the stately brick structures that Shine built, and the commonality they have is they were all had stuccoed exteriors, and almost all of them had scribed lines to make them look like ashlar stone. It was a hallmark of his building of stately structures. And so, of course, it had to go on to Goodwood, because what more stately structure would there be than the Goodwood Plantation main house? Shine was also a very avid landowner. This is a representation of the more than 60 pieces of property that Shine owned during the course of his life in Tallahassee, either singly shown in red or jointly shown in magenta. He also purchased what came to be referred to as the Shine Plantation. And this was down near the what's now the Bond community and the Seminole golf course. And that was the last piece of property that he bought. He bought it just shy of 1 year before he suddenly died on December 29th, 1862. And the unexpected death of Mr. Shine left us with a wealth of paperwork because he died without a will. And so it went through probate process, and hundreds of pages of documents have been collected and have made available on the website at the free family search website if you're interested in pursuing research on your own. So I have spent a fair amount of time going through these hundreds of pages of document that were left, documenting the state of his finances at the time of his death, and the debts that he owed, and what his worth was, and what he owned. And he had some outstanding debts that the man did not want to pay his bills. He had 5 years of medical services with Dr. Benton dating back to 1857 that he had not paid. And so Dr. Benton had to submit paperwork to get paid at the time that they were settling his accounts. The oldest claim was by Susan Allen that had dated back to 1839. So he's died in 1862 and he has a debt from 1839 that he hasn't paid yet. These are very patient people. The thing about Shine is that if you add up all of the debts that he had, it would be worth more than $1 million in today's money. He was also the owner of enslaved peoples, and there were 33 of them that he owned at the time of his death in 1862. This is an inventory that was prepared as part of the probate packet. You can see that all told, they were valued at $27,000. So he was an unapologetic owner of slaves. In the 1840 census, 22 years before he died, he owned 51 slaves at that point in time. So, interestingly enough, there's information in that probate packet that helps answer the question of where Shine's brickyard was located. Before I delve into that a little bit, I'll look at a commonly cited piece of history that was written by Evelyn Whitfield Henry, that was published in Volume 1 of the Tallahassee Historical Society Annual, in which it is claimed that Captain Shine built the home at 601 North Calhoun Street in the early 1830s. Unfortunately, Shine, we know from the deeds, didn't own that property until 1852. So clearly he could not have built a house there in the 1830s. Just isn't true. And it's also claimed in this published annual that the brick for all of these houses were made by Captain Shine in his brickyard on the town side of the deep cut. Ruins of the old kilns are still to be seen there. The deep cut is located at that large depression where the old Tallahassee Democrat building was located. So that gives you a reference. But among the documents that were in the probate information, they describe that Shine does indeed own 50 acres of land in the tract of land known as the Brickyard Field, which is contiguous to the city of Tallahassee on the road leading from Tallahassee to Miccosukee. So right here in the probate records, they're saying that the Brickyard is 50 acres of land and it's located on the edge of Tallahassee along Miccosukee Road. Okay. Delving into the historic deeds, I discovered that Shine had sold a piece of that property to a Mr. Peeler in 1861. And this is the deed, a part of the deed here, where it is actually specifically mentioned Shine's Brickyard. Shine's Brickyard. And what Shine did was, this was originally an 80-acre piece of property that had the Miccosukee Road running diagonally through the southern third of it. And Shine was selling that southern third south of Miccosukee Road to Mr. Peeler. And it's described here that the part that he's selling is part of the first half of the southwest in sections and sections. And so we know exactly where that piece of property was. And here it is. It's this piece of property right here, which on the 1883 Leroy Wall and John Bradford map was then owned by Mr. Choate. And fortunately enough, on the deed from R.A. Shine to A.J. Peeler for the sale of that property, they also had a sketch map of the same piece of property with the road running through. And there's an error in this map that it labels the north portion as 24 acres, 24 and a half acres, which is the portion that was sold to Peeler. But actually the 24 and a half acres is the portion south of the road. This portion north of the road is 55 acres. So they screwed up when they labeled this sketch map by indicating the wrong portion that went to Mr. Peeler. But what is also indicated on here is this clearing and a little square that appears to be a house and a well and a squiggle here in the left-hand corner. Is that where they dug the clay for the Shine Brickyard? I don't know. But in modern topography, this is where that piece of property was located. This is the 24 and a half acres that went to Mr. Peeler. This is the 55 acres that Mr. Shine retained until his death, and then was passed on to his sons. So, I'm trying to think here. Here's the Big Dig, where it said that Mr. Shine's brickyard was supposedly located, but the property, we know from the deeds, is way over here. So I think we can discount that Mr. Shine's kilns were located here. It must have been something else that they were talking about, because Mr. Shine had never owned any property here. Next slide. And then we're fairly confident that, once again, that this is where the brickyard is located, is because there was a discussion as to where they should run the railroad line that eventually was resulted in the digging of the big ditch. And it was reported in the state legislature's summary that this depression lies between Miller's Plantation and Shine's Brickyard. And looking through the deeds, I discovered this is where Mr. Miller's plantation was, and this is where the brickyard was. So there's no doubt that this is the piece of property that in 1862 is referred to as Shine's Brickyard. So have we discovered where the bricks were made for the Goodwood main house? No. Because Mr. Shine did not buy this piece of property until 1850. And the buildings here were built before that. So where is the original Shine Brickyard? Because this is the second one. We know that it was near Tallahassee because here's a clipping from an 1840 newspaper article in which they're trying to get a runway to be returned to Shine's Brickyard, and it's reported as being near Tallahassee. That's about all the information they give us in 1840. Luckily, turning back again to the probate records, there was part of the settlement that had to be taken care of upon Shine's death, or I'm sorry, before Shine's death, was a lawsuit that was brought by his business partner, Caleb Blood. He had gone into partnership with Shine in the brickmaking business, and they had a falling out because Mr. Shine gave away 100,000 bricks without paying his portion to Mr. Blood. So Mr. Blood was out his 50% portion of the brick sale of this 100,000 bricks. And this is part of the deposition here. The bricks were given to Cyrus Hall, and no money had been given to Mr. Blood to compensate for that. So there was a lawsuit. This eventually went to the Florida State Supreme Court, where it was ruled that the mediator that was hired to decide the decision on how the money should be repaid was correct. So once it was all said and done, there was half interest had to be given back to him. And in here, they actually refer to where the bricks were being made. And at that point in time, it was commonly called the Potter Brickyard. And it was after the dissolving of the partnership between Mr. Blood and Mr. Hall that everyone was starting to refer to it, and even then, as Shine's Brickyard. But it's not the 1850 Shine Brickyard, it's the Potter Brickyard. And the question is, where was Potter's Brickyard? It's also interesting that in this deposition, they talk about some of the buildings that were built using the bricks from Potter's Brickyard. And they specifically mentioned the old Leon County Jail, they mentioned the old Capitol building, and they mentioned the Methodist Church. Up until I read this, I had never seen anywhere in print anybody ever saying that Shine built the Methodist Church. This was the first written information that I had that I had encountered that he was responsible for the construction of the Methodist Church. And it must have been a bustling place because he talks about the fact that there were 4 kilns operating there. And he was cranking out, hundreds of thousands of bricks to do it. So when it was all done, said and done, Shine agreed to pay Blood back for his half interest in the brickyard, and half the expenses had been earned up at that point in time, and it was all settled in 1841. So again, the question still remains, where is the Potter brickyard that soon became known as Shine's brickyard? So far, I've had no luck in finding it. I have found evidence for a number of other brickyards in the Tallahassee area. There's the McMillan brickyard that was advertised in 831. There's the Hines brickyard that's also advertised in the same year. There's the Smith's brickyard that was advertised here in 1846. There's Call's brickyard that is advertised in this 1840 advertisement. And Call's brickyard, people have known about that in existence for a long time, but nobody knows where that's located either. So it's interesting question that remains to be answered as to where the Potter brickyard or Shine's original brickyard was located. If you guys have any information on it, let me know. Okay, so I'll take questions. If anybody has questions? Yes. They think that that is probably his based on the style, but there's no written documentary record to prove it. So that's why I didn't include it. But because of the architectural similarities, they think it's a good chance that he did. Yeah. Could very well have been renting it. There are advertised ads in the newspapers at that time where people are talking about willing to lease their brickyards. But I have yet to encounter anything that's referred to as Potter's brickyard. And when I searched through the land records for Leon County, there's no one by the name of Potter listed from that time period. So there's nobody by the name of Potter who owns any property that I can find in Leon County. So it begs the question, where does the name Potter come from? Is it because it's a potter's field? They're just mining clay for making local ceramics? And if so, is it just anybody's guess as to where it's located? It's hard to say. I have looked at historic contour maps of the 1850s Shine brickyard, and I can't find anything that looks like an open pit. And if you're making, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bricks, you'd expect that there would be a pit somewhere. It's possible that he's mining the clay someplace else and then bringing it back to the brickyard to be formed into bricks and dried and fired. That's a possibility too. Yeah. No. Yes, the great conflagration that struck Tallahassee in 1842, 43. And then after that, they required all buildings to be built with brick. And Shine clearly was providing lots and lots of brick for that purpose. But he wasn't the only one. Other folks were producing bricks too. Yeah. I don't know. I didn't research where the Tallahassee Press Brick company was located. I'm sure you could find it without too much difficulty. It just wasn't on my radar screen. No, the Tallahassee Press Brick Company. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where they were located. Yeah.
Besides the Briscoe, brick manufacturing company, how many others had manufacturing machine. I believe, all that.
There has been research that's been written up talking about the bricks on the Call property. And during the research that was done on that, they identified the fact that he did have a brick making machine. Shine also had a brick manufacturing machine by the time that he died. Part of the probate records includes people billing him for parts to repair his brick manufacturing machines. So we know that he had them. But how many, I have no way of guessing.
He had built the household shelter.
It's possible. There's no evidence of him having built it for somebody else or for himself, for that matter. I don't know. If we went back to can you go back to the map that shows the pieces of property that he owned? I know. There. When he died, this was the property that was called the Shine House. These 4 city squares were all considered the property where his house was located. He built the Chittenden House on this piece of property here, but this is now park. And he built this, and about a year after he built it, he turned around and sold it. I'm guessing that he probably lived in the Chittenden House, but I haven't researched where he may have moved after having built and lived in the Chittenden House. It's possible that he was on the Calhoun property. But the thing that I've raised that information here is to take everything that's written in those early 1940s histories with a big grain of salt, because they're not based on research. They're based on hearsay. And so said this, and they must know, right? So if you do the research, sometimes you'll find that a lot of those historic assertions don't hold water. Well, if there's no more questions, we can go to the Gray Cottage, and I can point out some of the things that we talked about here and answer any more questions that you might have.
I figured out where that brickyard is, Lonnie.
That's why I left my coat on. Okay, so here's this. I don't want to walk off with that. Yeah.
Curtis. Curtis. Okay.